All right, so hi, I'm Bill Beverly from Evo Electric, and I'd like to take a little bit of time to discuss how I have performed product development and how our organization at Evo Electric is working on product development. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of what it means to do product development, whether we're focusing on hardware or software, and how we bring those ideas to life.
Okay, yes, start.
Great. So a little bit about us and Evo Electric and what we're up to. We're deploying commercial electric vehicles at a fraction of time and resources than it takes to develop a brand new electric vehicle, specifically commercial trucks. We combine our offering with a turnkey data system. We have an entire ecosystem that supports fleet owners, truck drivers, truck fleet owners as well. We focus on taking the existing used trucks and we upcycle them, meaning we take them from where they're currently being driven with a diesel or a gas engine. We replace that diesel gas engine with a full electric system. And that way we can really play on the circular economy principles that are really important to us, and
Yeah,
minimize waste.
sure.
So our team is extremely, competent, and we have a lot of leadership in the vehicle level, the battery level, power electronics, and controls and integration. Um, we are relatively young as an organization. We started in 2019, so we'll be 4 years old at the end of the year. That puts us in the seed
Okay.
stage. So, like a customer pilot level, we're working on targeting production by the end of this year. We're extremely small team, 14 people, really focused on automotive, vehicles, batteries, systems, and controls. But if you combine the experience of those 14 people, we've got over 100 years of combined and relative experience in our small team, specifically on electric vehicles and technologies. Um,
Wow.
yeah, so what I think is really important here is speak a little bit more about product development is we actually have both a hardware and software solution that we're developing. So as I talk through how we personally manage product development by managing the hardware and software, we're also living it as well. We're doing it with our own product. And last couple of things. I mean, we're happy to be part of the Long Beach Accelerator program. We are part of the first cohort in spring of 2021. We're currently members of the 100 Plus Accelerator, which is a group that's established by Anheuser-Busch, InBev, Grupo Modelo, groups like that, as well as Unilever, and large organizations that are really trying to seek sustainability changes at the corporate level. And then also part of LACI, Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, currently in the pilot phase of their program here in Los Angeles. So that's a bit about us, Marley, and what we're up to. So
Yeah, it's so interesting, really.
I
I'm
appreciate that.
fascinated of this topic because I hadn't heard before, so it's so interesting for me. Um, I think it. I want to know more about this. So
Yeah,
yes.
perfect. Would love to share more, and I will as I talk through some product development. We also have a Latam presence. We're based in California, but we have a office in Bogota, Colombia, and we're
Wow.
doing some of our pilots in Mexico with a Grupo Modelo, like we said. So we're very interested in expanding not just from the U.S. but also into our fellow brothers and sisters in countries nearby. And I'm half Caucasian, half Mexican ethnicity, and I would love to get back to my Mexican roots as well.
Yeah,
So yeah.
that's so cool.
So cool. A little bit about myself too, and why I believe I'm qualified to talk about this. I have over 18 years of working experience as an engineer.
Wow,
10 of
so
those
long.
years spent, yeah, it's been a long time. So
Yes,
uh,
it's
it's where all my hair went, as you can tell. Um, so,
no.
so 10 years in aerospace. I worked as an intern at Boeing for a while, and Boeing really positions itself as a final solutions provider, an original equipment manufacturer. That's what OEM means. And then after doing that for a few years, I really wanted to get more detailed understanding of how to build products. So I went to what's
Okay.
called a tier one, a supplier to Boeing that provides them systems. And then at that supplier called Moog, I was able to still work with top tier, OEMs across the world like Boeing and Airbus and Gulfstream and whatnot. So
Wow.
it really helped me get a visibility on how each one of those organizations was doing their own product development. But we had a deliverable that we have a system as Moog that we had to give them. So 10 years of that really leveled me up and got me that core experience. And then after 10 years, there's this little company that showed up in Southern California called Faraday Future that was creating a new type of Tesla, for example, a new EV in the passenger vehicle space. And they were looking for all kinds of people, all kinds of talent. I managed to get in. I managed to learn a lot about automotive and electric vehicles at the same time, but I brought my knowledge book from Moog, which is essentially I was doing gears and transmissions and systems that were on aircraft. And of course, cars had those similar systems. So there was a lot of knowledge transfer that came. And then I was able to work with Faraday for Aston Martin Formula E. And then I went to a battery manufacturer doing lithium-ion batteries and sold batteries for 2 years at Romeo Power. Then I did one more little jump to another type of Faraday Future company called Indy EV, doing another car, an EV car. And then that was about the time where I said, hey, you know what? I've worked in a lot of places. I've learned a lot of things. It's time to start something of our own accord. And I started, with my co-founder, Jackson, who's from Bogota originally. So we really got together and said, we need to find a way to bring these technologies to Latam and to people in California, United States that can't afford it. And so that's how Eve Electric was born.
Yeah, that's cool because you can understand other thoughts and you can spread that.
Yeah, and it's been fun. It's been, like I said, almost 4 years. And so great. So I'll jump right into it. Product development, right? What is it? It's a big title. It's a big word, big phrase.
Yes.
But the best way to...
a big process, I suppose.
Yeah, 100%. The best way that I can use to describe it is, let's consider something that you do a lot, or we do a lot. If we want to go on a road trip, we want to go and relax and drive someplace, we don't just get in the car and go, right? Typically. I mean, some people might, but typically you get in the car.
Yes, but it's not so easy.
Exactly.
Yes.
So product development is similar to that, because we say, you know what, where do I want to go? Do I have the money to get there and
Yes.
to keep me there and enjoy it? Have I brought enough supplies? If I'm staying overnight, do I have my luggage, my clothing?
Yes.
And hopefully you avoid obstacles. You don't actually run into, road construction or issues or getting lost. And if you do that all right, then you can relax, right? At the end of the day.
Yes.
So that's product development in a nutshell. It's the journey of an idea or a concept through to mass market release. So your idea that you might have as a product, you need to plan it out. You need to make sure that you have the runway to get it done. You need to make sure you have the people and the equipment. You avoid obstacles. And at the end of the day, you release the product and hopefully you can relax, right?
Yeah. Still you have it, you can do it.
Exactly. So I like that comment because it goes right into this next one. Why do we need it, right? Well, I mean, if you're not convinced by the last slide, let's dig a little deeper, right?
No, I'll combine, but still continue.
We need it because we need to streamline and focus our internal processes and procedures and the people and the resources, right? How do we really socialize a plan? How do we really understand what we're doing makes sense and has value, right? So what we need product development as a process because it helps us really map out how our product will give a solution to a customer, right? At the end of the day, your idea is worth nothing unless it actually meets a customer need, right?
Yes, exactly.
And what's interesting as well is it also is not a firm plan, meaning it doesn't have to be it's not unchangeable. You can change your ideas, you can adjust your ideas. It's not trying to put a process together that says you shall not change it, you can't change your mind, but rather understanding what those changes do to your plan and how they affect them. So between hardware and software companies, it's slightly different in how they approach things, because very simply, if you listen to Eric Ries, who wrote the information behind the lean startup approach, he creates the loop on the right, which is called the build, measure, learn loop, right? So traditionally, how he thinks software should be developed is you have an idea, you build it, you form a product out of it, you measure that product with the people, you get the data, you learn from how it's working, and you go back and revisit the idea, and you continuously have this circle of learning, right, that goes on.
It's like a circle.
Exactly. And in hardware, it's slightly different. You don't necessarily have the ability to go back and learn and complete that circle, because hardware takes a lot of effort up front, and then you have to make a lot of them. And if you're trying to change your mind right in the process of making a lot of them, it's going to cost a lot of money and it's going to be a lot of issues, right?
Yes, it's not so easy.
Yeah, so hardware is rooted in something that's a bit older in methodology and thought process, which is, okay, let's make sure that we understand what the customer wants, how we spell those out so we can design those things, and then how we do the work, and then how we check that the work's been done, and then give it to the customer. Because if we're wrong, we just lost a whole lot of money and time, and that's
Yes,
something
and the
we have to
customers, you know, if you don't do it like at his, yeah, you lost
100%.
it.
Yeah, you lose everything. So that's why it's so strict on being able to map out your journey. So a couple of examples to bring it home here. I don't know if you have a pop socket. I feel like everybody has a pop socket on the back of their phone these days, right?
I have one, but I broke up.
Yeah,
It
well,
fell down and it broke.
you have to get another one. They're pretty cheap. And the nice thing about it is, what I really like is, it was created by a professor, and he said, you know what, I need something to hold my phone and put it on the surface, right? Because my finger, when I hold my big phone, my finger is getting tired of holding my phone. So, you have what I have here, you have a clip, right, that holds your phone up, but he created a pop socket to do that primarily, and also to set it on your table. So if you're watching a video, you can look at it. And so that was a good idea. And it was very simple, and he didn't have to put a whole lot of process into it. He said, let's just make these things. But he got to a point where now competition came in and said, hey, we can also make those things, or make them similar to those, like what I have in my case, for example. So what he did is he said, you know what would take me to the next level? And he realized that pop socket is real estate. It's marketing real estate. It's a small billboard, right? It's a small advertisement. And so he started connecting with other companies and saying, what if we could give you pop sockets and actually have your logo or your information on them? And that changed his whole business model, really, because now he wasn't so focused on the hardware, but the advertising revenue that he was getting from the hardware. And so by 2018, that change of philosophy using good product development processes allowed him to grow the company, and it became $200 million by 2018 for these little things that you see on the screen. It's ridiculous, right? So that's a good example. Now, a bad example, or a poor, I wouldn't say bad. Kodak is still a very important company across the world. In the 80s and 90s, they had a huge market share, 90% of the market across the world. They were everywhere. They helped invent the digital camera. And then they went through market research in the 80s and said, hey, what do we think about the digital camera? How do we think people are going to react to it? And the marketing firm that they talked with said, we think people are going to love digital film, digital cameras. And Kodak said, we're not so sure. We're going to keep making film. And so they chose to ignore the market feedback, which is the first no-no of product development process. Is you have to understand what your customer wants and map that out, right? So in the 90s and the 80s and 90s, they started getting, a lot of competition coming in that ended up taking in, digital-based competitors came in and just started taking a foothold. And so because they ignored digital, by about 2020 or 2012, they filed Chapter 11. They went bankrupt. They still exist today, but they're just a shell of what they were when they were, when they ruled the world back in the 80s and 90s. So
you're in the process.
Yep. And this is valuable feedback for us, because we don't want to be a Kodak. We want to be a pop socket, right?
Of course. I think.
So let's go through the process a bit more. So what does it mean to really go through and understand a user, and what is a user story, right? If we follow what Atlassian, which is the company that produces Jira and Confluence, some of these modern tools to track software development, they define a user story as an informal, general explanation of a feature written from a customer's viewpoint. So how does a customer want to use or work with your idea, right? I like the visual on the top right, because, for example, if you're a restaurant, you have a couple of users that you need to work with, right? You have a food critic, or a customer, and just say a customer. What does that food critic or customer want? Well, they want to eat food. They really don't want to pay food, but they know they have to pay for it. A lot of them really want to drink wine, right? That's something that people look forward
Yes.
to. But then you also have another user. To make your restaurant successful, you have a chef, right? You have that chef that has to cook the food and prepare the food. So these are user stories. You're mapping out what users relate to your product or your idea and how they interact with your idea, which in this case is a restaurant, right?
Yes.
So how do we further map that? Because now you're like, okay, good. I have an idea of what people want from me. How do I turn that into a product? How do I turn that restaurant into something that actually I can own and I can operate? Well, now
Yeah.
that you have user feedback, for example, if you're making a software component, you give them an interface, what's called application software. And then underneath that interface is what powers that software. So it's usually operating system, like iOS or Windows or Android or whatever it is. And then that system has to work off of some hardware. So again, back to your phone as an example, the user interface is there. The application software is on the phone. It's what we play with every day. Below that is the software that powers that application software. And then the hardware is
Yes.
actually sitting in your hand, right?
Yeah,
So
sure.
mapping those things out is important. Now you have a user, but how do you get to something that actually works for the user? Make sense?
Yeah, of course. It's very important to know the opinion of the customer to have a better product or service to offer them.
Yep. And be able to track that to your product.
Yeah.
So now here's a big important one, product planning, right? How do we plan and execute? There are two types of, there's more than two, really. There's many different ways to plan, but I'm going to talk about two because these are the two that we balance between in our organization since we have both hardware and software. So I talked about it before, but this shape that you see here that looks like a V is literally called the V model on the top with the blue and the red and the yellow. And so what waterfall typically does is say, let's take our idea, let's create requirements from the idea, let's give steps that follow those requirements that are detailed design steps. Like now I have to, if a requirement is something like this phone has to work in cold temperatures, then now an engineer or a designer can go and design that phone to work in cold temperatures, right?
Yes.
And then you implement that design. And then how do I know I made it work? Well, you have to test it. Now I got to go test that phone in a
Yeah,
cold
sure.
temperature and be like, it works. So you go down this track of, the V model. You say, establish my requirements, do the work, get down, make it happen, and then go back up the loop and say, let me test everything that I just thought that I did. So that way the product is ready for release. Because if you miss the chance, like I said earlier, and getting a little ahead, software allows you to kind of loop, and it's on the right side that you'll see, but hardware really doesn't, not very well. There's a cost and a penalty involved in that. And so moreover, on the left side, you can see a bit more of that where you start with a requirement, you trickle it down to a design, then you implement it, then you verify it. And then once you verified it, then hopefully you have limited maintenance. You don't have to, you send it out there and you really don't have to maintain it, hopefully, or you have a very small amount of maintenance. And that's waterfall, okay? Agile is a bit more fun, I would say, because it's a bit newer and it really comes from the software loops. And that's what you can see there in the top right corner is what's called the Scrum and Agile philosophy. It's this loop, right? It looks like a roller coaster loop. Now, the fun thing about that is this loop, you don't just have one loop when you're designing software. You have many, many, many loops, right? But
Yes.
the loops are there to control how much time you put into that software stuff. So I'll give you another example using the phone. Let's say that you as a user, you're like, let's pretend this is 10 years ago. You're like, I want an app that allows me to know what my travel would look like. If I want to take a bus to work or to university, I want to be able to open my phone up and find an app that does that. And so your user story is, I'm a user, I'm a bus rider, and I want a app that tells me how to get from my start to my finish, right?
Yes.
Uh, so this loop would come in and say, great, that user story, I'm going to plan how I do it. I'm going to design it. I'm going to develop the code to do it for the app. I'm going to test the app. Then I'm going to send it out to a small group of users, yourself as a beta user, an early user. I'm going to review their feedback and see what they think about it. And then I'm either ready to launch that or I've learned a lot in that review loop and I go, hold on a second, let me go back through that loop, right? I need to redesign it,
Sorry,
redevelop.
is the most common process, right? The agile? Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
agile. Yeah, it's definitely most common. It's becoming more common in hardware as well. But it's difficult to manage because again, like if you're too far down in your hardware development, you can't make
Yes.
changes without big penalties. But if you're early in your idea, you can actually use an agile process in a hardware company as well. So yeah, it is the most common, especially these days since everything is software enabled. Um, and also value stream mapping at the bottom. What that really is again saying all the stuff that I do to make sure that it's relevant and I'm not distracted. I want to make sure it actually brings value to the customer. Back to the beginning, right? I want the customer to
Yes.
be excited about it. So, all right, design and iteration. So once we have an idea, we establish requirements and design accordingly, like I mentioned. On the left side, again, is that V model. So we establish a requirement, we sit together, we document that. Again, for a phone, you say the requirement is my customer has told me that they'll only take a phone that's 5 inches tall. Anything bigger than that, it's too big. So my first requirement is no larger than 5 inches tall, right?
Okay.
Or 100 millimeters or whatever. So that's a requirement I take, and then I flow it downward, and I say, well, what can I fit everything I need to in that phone in 100 millimeters or 5 inches or so, 4 to 5 inches. And so then that turns into a yes or a no, and then eventually we say, well, let's start making that software design, hardware design. Let's code that. And then we got everything in this phone. We said, okay, this looks like it's going to work. Now we take it through testing. We go, all right, it's working or it's not working. Sometimes that changes your requirement. Oh, I can't pack all these chips and these screens and buttons into a phone that small. I need to increase my phone size a bit, right? And so in that case, you would change your requirement before you get too far down the hardware loop. But you need to engage your customer, right? And make sure, are you okay if it's,
Yes.
you said 5 inches. What if I said it was 5.2 inches? Would that be okay? Most of the time, customers are like, yeah, okay, whatever. I can't tell. Sure. Um, so you keep going up that V until you get to the final point where you're like, it all works. I'm meeting my customer obligations and requirements, and now I'm going to release it, right? Now, again, back to the software side, to your point, Agile is the most common framework because that's just the hardware we talked about. But what's really making that phone valuable? All that software that lives on there, right? That's where a lot of the work is really done. So an overview here is what I show where how do you manage the amount of time that you spend in design and iteration and changing these things? Well, you have typically a team that champions features and functions on software that say, I'm going to be the one in charge of this map app or this travel app that we talked about. And I'm going to take the customer requirements and I'm going to work with my team to talk about how much effort we put into the next 2 weeks, let's just say, right? Um,
Yes.
so that's that sprint planning meeting where they say, okay, we've got 10 people here. You do this, you do this, you do that, you do that. And as soon as you're done, you switch to doing this, you switch to doing this. And so that
Yes.
1 to 4 week sprint is that first loop. It's like, let's go, let's start working. How are we doing in this loop? Okay, great. And then every day you have a daily scrum meeting because that's that check. You're saying, hey team, how's it going? Are we making progress? Is it good? Do we
Yes.
need
It's
to
a lot of
more people?
teamwork.
A ton of teamwork, an immense amount of teamwork, a huge amount of communication, which is important because if
Yes.
you've ever done coding, you can get lost in coding and disappear for a while. So this is really trying to keep you, in the loop with your teammates and everybody aligned on what we're trying to bring to the market. So.
Yes. Sure.
All right, proof of concept versus prototype versus MVP. This is sort of a controversial slide because everybody has their own idea, I would say, of what a POC, prototype, and MVP are. So I'm just going to define what works best for our organization and what I'm used to. A proof of concept is a basic technical validation of your idea to show its value and structure. So I'm going to point you down to the image on the bottom left, which I like from Z4 Group. I really think they did a good job here. The proof of concept is I want to bring cake to people. So I'm going to draw the cake and I'm going to show you what the cake looks like, right? And that's your proof of concept. So somebody can look at it and be like, okay, I understand. All right, show me more. Then you go to the prototype stage and you say, now let's present that so the user really gets an idea of how the design will be presented. So somebody says, number one, they're like, great, I see that you want to do a cake. What's the flavor? What's inside the cake? How is it, how much butter is in there? That kind of stuff, or frosting, right?
Yes.
That's where the prototype really aims to be like, okay, now that we've agreed that we're going to do a cake, now let's show you a bit more on how it's created and what's inside of it and what you can understand that it does for you. There's strawberries in there and there's nuts. Yeah.
Yes.
And then the last thing is minimum viable product. Now it's like, okay, I've shown you the cake, I've shown you what's inside the cake, and now I want to actually give you a first taste of the cake, right? So that's where you bring those things together. And it's important to note that the lean startup defines the minimum viable product as literally like whatever the minimum effort is, the minimum spending, time, resource to get your concept in front of a customer so that customer can tell you what they think about it and give you feedback.
Yes.
That is the most important thing. No matter how you define each one of these things, the most important thing to remember is for a minimum viable product, your goal is to get something in front of a customer that generates valuable input.
Yeah, sure.
Do you like cake? I love cake, by the way. I'm hungry now, so.
Yes, me too.
So now, goals and KPIs, key performance indicators. All right. So a plan is worth nothing without an idea of how you would achieve it. Prototypes, proof of concepts, MVPs, those are also worth nothing if you don't understand what you want to achieve with them. If you just send them out there and you're like, tell me how you feel about them. Like, is that really going to give you the knowledge you need to improve your product? Typically, no, right? So what we like to do is create KPIs, key performance indicators, and this SMART goals is what really govern how we write those goals, those KPIs. And SMART was something that was created by Dorian Miller and Cunningham back in the 1980s because they recognized as a consulting group, they were working with large companies, and they recognized large companies were writing goals, but their goals were very hard to measure, right? Things like, I have a goal to get up earlier at work and get to work earlier. And like, oh, that's a good goal, but how early? And how often are you doing it? And how do we know that you've accomplished your goal, right? Like you wrote a goal that's easy to follow, right?
Yeah.
So SMART says, well, let's use SMART as letters that remind you on how to create those goals and how to write them, right? So using that example, make it specific. S, what do you want to do? I want to get to work earlier, right? M, measurable. How do I know when I've reached it? Well, I'm going to actually look at the time that I arrive at work, and I'm going to write that down someplace, and I'm going to show a pattern, right? Achieve it.
Yes.
Can I achieve it? Well, I don't know. I mean, do I like getting up in the morning? I'm a morning person personally. I don't know if you are, but
more or less.
Is it achievable and is it realistic, right? Like, can I actually do this? Or am I a night person trying to force myself to do something I'm not used to, right?
Yes.
And then timely, like how long do I want to measure that goal? Like, what if I said, I'm going to do this for a week? Do we think a week is really going to change your behavior? Is a week enough time for you to measure the benefit of your goal?
Maybe, yes.
Maybe. I mean, depending on who you are, right? It's up to you to set your goals. I would say a month for myself. I'd say if I can do it for a month, then it becomes something that's changed in my life. So that's essentially how the SMART goals work, where you're going through and saying, how do I write a KPI and a goal that I can objectively look at after the process is done and say, okay, I've accomplished something, I've learned something, and now I can push that back into my product or my idea and continue to evolve the product. Make sense?
Yeah. A lot of sense.
Perfect. So we have to be smart. So with being smart, we also need to round out testing and validating. So again, I talked about it earlier. No matter whether you have a hardware or a software product, you need to test it. You need to know when you're done, right?
Yes.
So you can test a prototype, you can test an MVP, and really it helps you close the loop on your requirements. Meaning like, again, I have a requirement. Did I meet it? Does the product work? You can also mitigate and close risks. For example, some risks you can't get rid of. You might be like, I have a concern in the early part of my phone design that For example, 5.2 inches is going to be just too much for that customer, right? I have a risk that they're not going to want to buy it because it's just too big. I can't close that risk until I actually have evidence, until I start selling these things and seeing if that was a big issue to the customers not buying my product. But you can try to mitigate that, meaning you can try to control that risk by saying, man, if at any point in my design, if I can get that phone back under 5 inches, then I've mitigated and closed that risk because I've met that customer need, right?
Yeah.
You're always measuring valuable data. You're always trying to understand what the future performance of your product is, whether it's hardware or software. What's also important is establishing test campaigns with reasonable targets, meaning, like I said earlier, you can always get stuck in software loops. You can design software, you can test software, and you can just put your head down and just code software for months, for years, right? But
Yeah, sure.
a minimum amount of software is required to release a product to get it out there in front of people so you can learn from it, but you're not done with it. You're still working in the background doing updates, right? Or root fixes or adjustments, right? And you're pushing out updates every so often to keep your software healthy. So as a company, it's important that you would sit together with your peers and you establish the timing that you think is important. Like how often do we do testing? How long do we do it? And then we just move on until the next loop. And then we do more testing,
Yes.
and then you move on. So that's an important part, not to get trapped into that. Release and deploy. So we're coming up to the couple end slides here. This is the fun part. So once you've got your software, your hardware product, right? In this case, I'm going to talk about software more specifically. When you release, how much of that release do you want to end? How much do you want to end for the customer? Do you want to end your own databases? And do you want to end your own computational servers? Do you want that overhead and all those systems to deploy your app? Or do you want to send it into like an app store, for example, and have the app store support that? Or is it a mixture of both, right? If as a company, your answer is yes, I want to own all of that data and all that software. It's like, okay, well, that's good. It requires that you have a very good understanding of infrastructure planning, like technology planning, IT, and management. And then it minimizes your security risk because now you understand where that data is going, you control it, but you better know what you control because it much more increases your risk for your customer, right? Because operationally, if you have a data breach or if you miss information, it happens all the time. People are going to be very upset with you. They're going to, most likely seek claims for money from you because their data is no longer safe. So it's just something that you have to balance. Like if you want to do it, make sure you do it right. If your answer is no, and you're like, I don't want to do any of that stuff, it terrifies me. It's like, well, that's okay, because big companies are taking that risk on for you. Like for example, Amazon, Google, you can actually purchase cloud systems from them and cloud structures and still be able to use your software, but have them manage it. It's still important to know, though, that when you send data to their structures back and forth, you still need to understand that you're sending the right amount of data and that you know that data is protected. So
yeah,
what's a nice bonus, though, let's say, like, again, if you are a company that's saying, I have a cool software solution, and I want to sell it to a company that doesn't have this solution, but I don't want to change their software. I don't want to change anything they're doing. That's a good bonus, because if you can come into a company and say, you don't change anything, my software plugs a hole in your operation, it adds value in the middle 2 steps,
yes,
then the companies will typically be very excited about that. If not, it's not the end of the world. Companies might say, okay, I'll change my structure, my databases, my technology basis to work with your software, but typically it needs to be very compelling and a very
yes. I mean,
large
you
scale.
can do it like again, but it takes a lot of work to do it.
It does. Absolutely. All right. So this is my last slide. And essentially what I want to kind of summarize with here is, at the end of the day, once you release your product, you're not done learning. You need to keep learning, right? Everybody likes to think like, oh, I got this thing out there, I'm making money, all done, right? No, in this world, one product doesn't mean, complete success. One product means that you're in there, you're generating revenue, you're generating growth. But consumers this day demand new solutions very, very rapidly. They want to understand how you're learning and how you're improving. So you can't stop learning even after the first one's done. And things that you can do to set up good practices, traditional approaches that have been used, is you can, after you've released a product, you can sit down and have recurring reviews of product deployments and data. You can look at what you've sent, what you've released, and you can see how it's performing. And you have reviews as a team to say, what are we learning? How is this working? Do people like this? Do people hate it? Another thing is a lesson learned database. So a lesson learned database is internally, groups can actually set up an Excel or a database internally on the company and say, let's actually, in the middle of learning, let's capture all those learnings and document them. Like, I found this out in the middle of the product or the project. I'm going to have to write this down because I'll forget it. And then I'm going to share it with the rest of the team when the time is right in this database. So everybody goes, oh yeah, I remember when we messed up, but you've written that down so we don't have to mess it up ever again. You know what I mean? The phrase post-mortem is not used very much, but it literally means after death. And what it means, let's say you failed. Let's say in one of your products, you failed. You get something out there, it doesn't work. Instead of, like, the emotional feeling is to say, hey, you know what? I either am going to give up or I'm going to ignore it. Like, whatever, I'm going to move on. But what proper product development teaches you to do is to look at why you failed. Look at the data, understand what caused that failure the best you can, and to put that into the lesson learned database and put that into your product learning so you don't do it again. If you don't learn from your mistakes, you're never going to create something that has value, right?
Yeah, sure.
And then finally, generational design reviews. Once you send a product out, and this goes on all the time with these phones, right? You send a phone out there, and they're right as soon as they release a phone, they're already working on the next phone, right? And so
Yes.
how do they make that next phone valuable even when it's like, I haven't even learned that first phone's doing? So how am I already working on another phone? Well, it's because these companies have set up generational loops, right? They keep on looking through and say, what am I learning? What do I need to be learning? And when am I done? How do I pull that data into the next product as soon as possible? And so that's really important in the product and hardware and software development route. And Ray LeBlanc on the right here, he says something that I really like, which is, you learn something every day if you pay attention, right? So yeah, that's a bit about product development. Again, at Eve Electric, we have a good understanding of both sectors of hardware and software. We have to mix those together. There are a couple of good books that we use that help us understand. Some of them being an old book that talks about waterfall stuff. It's called the Project Management Body of Knowledge book, and it's like a big, thick manual. And it's a good book, but it's also used quite religiously. People say, this is how you have to do it, right?
Yes.
And that's not entirely true, in my opinion. I mean,
I don't think so.
Yeah, exactly. And there's another book that I've been recently reading called Project to Product by Mick Kirsten. And that one's really fun because that one's written in 2018, and it's written specifically for companies that are starting as hardware companies that understand that they have to make a software change or they have to use a software process. So how do you, again, mix those two things together? And it requires a bit of an understanding of both of these sectors, this waterfall, this agile scrum that we were talking about, and value stream management. Everything you do, if it's hardware or software, comes from being able to plot that it does bring value to the customer at the end of the day. So that is how we handle product development. And because of that, we've got a couple of vehicles that are currently driving out right now. We've got many more customers ready to receive our product by the end of the year. So as a startup, very proud and also humbled by the ability for us to grow quickly with a minimal amount of resources, but it's all thanks to modern product development. So thank you for the chance for me to talk about it.
No, thank you for your time and for speak about that topic. So interesting. Thanks.
Yeah. Any questions? Any questions about product development that I can sort through for you?
I'm not sure if I have questions. I can. I don't know how to say. Like, I can receive that the most important thing is on the customer all the time. because the customer have the last word.
Yeah, if that's the only thing we get out of this entire conversation, you got it 100%. Customer is the most important part of the process. So we have to make sure that everything we do is representing and respecting that customer's desire and getting it there. So yeah, cool.
Yes.
Well,
So
awesome.
cool. Just thanks to be here with us.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. Appreciate it. Check us out at Evo Electric. You can check us out on LinkedIn or go to our website, www.evoelectricnow.com. And we look
Yes.
forward to being able to have product in California and Mexico very soon. So hopefully you'll see us in your own backyard. So,
Okay. Thanks.
cool. Thank you.